Hi, my name is Isaac Olson, and I'm part of the Microsoft Dynamics GP support team. Today I wanted to do a quick video just going over the examples from my blog on workflow conditions and when they're not met with the setting. Today we're going to look at PM batches, and you'll note that I have them separated out for manual payments and PM transactions. So if it's a manual payment batch, then the origin is 3 on the workflow batch header, and so it'll go down this path. And then I have separate steps for whether the batch total is greater than 10,000 or greater than 1,000,000. And you'll notice that I have the if batch origin is 3 also in this step. And that's because if I use the continue to next step method, even if my first step is not true, it will continue to the next step embedded or nested underneath it. So I need to have this condition of the first step inside of my second step when I use this method, which makes your conditions a little less efficient. Also adds a little bit to your performance when you're submitting. But just to start for an example so you can see it both ways, I'm going to leave the continue to next step marked for each of my workflow steps in here. And we'll take a look at the workflow history and how things are, faster or slower based on what I select. So the manual payments, right away it's going to say continue to the next step, then it's going to say manual payment batch over 10K, continue to the next step, manual batch over 1,000,000, continue to the next step. And then inside of the PM transactions, which is a completely separate first step on the workflow, this one is also going to have continue to the next step on each of its conditions all the way through. So let's get started. I am going to go grab one of my batches, and this PM payables batch, this is a payables transaction entry batch. I just submitted it right before I hit record on the video here, so I'm just going to approve it. And just as an added bonus, I also turned on the automatic posting when workflow is complete, which was a new feature in Microsoft Dynamics GP 18.4, which was released in October of 2021. So I actually don't have to pull my batch back up to post it. It automatically posted for me. So let's take a look now at my transaction that was in the batch that was approved and posted, and we'll take a look at the workflow history. And you'll notice here that my workflow history is pretty congested. I've got all this extra information. It's just, all these no approval required, no approval required, no approval required. So one of the big things about changing this setting is it helps your workflow history get cleaned up or look a little nicer. So what I'll do is I'll actually screenshot this so that we remember what this workflow history looked like before we changed our settings, and we can come back to it. So I'm going to close these out, and now I'm going to do the same test, except this time I'm going to change each of my workflow steps to end the workflow path. Now, sometimes people get scared. Oh, I don't want it to end the workflow path. I don't want it to, I want it to keep going to the next thing. Well, you got to remember, what I was trying to display in this blog is that end workflow path means that it's not going to keep going into the steps that you're already on. It doesn't mean it's not going to keep checking down here. Okay, so each of these it's two separate paths. Manual payments is a path. PM transactions is a path. So if I do end workflow path, it's still, if this condition right here is not met, it's still going to check my PM transactions conditions down here and do its thing. You're not stopping the whole workflow. Okay, so now at this point, I have all of my workflow steps all set to end workflow path. Because if I submit a payables transaction batch that is not over 10,000, I don't also need to check if it's over 1 million. Same with the manual payments. If I have a payables transaction batch and it's not a manual payment batch, then why do I want workflow to also check if it's a manual payment batch and over 10,000, or if it's a manual payment batch and over 1 million? We can bypass having to do all these extra checks and make the performance much better by saying end workflow path if the first one's not true, because then it'll just come right down into here. So let's take a look now with this example. Okay, so I have another payables transaction ready to go, and it'll submit and it'll use my new workflow rules because I haven't submitted this one before. And now I'll approve my workflow. And we'll get to witness the automatic workflow posting again. Okay, so now that's been submitted and approved. And if we refresh my inquiry here, PMTRX2, let's take a look at the workflow history. Now look how much more clean this is. We only have one manual payments step that was auto approved because it said we don't approve, or we don't need a approval on this step. It didn't go and check all the other manual payment steps. And then in the PM transactions, it did our first step, we got our approval, and then it checked to verify our next step to see if it required approval. It did not. So then we had no action needed, and this became our final approval, and the batch was posted. And just for a reference, let me pull up a screenshot of what our previous batch looked like, just so you can see how much less congested my workflow history is, which also kind of gives you an example of how this can make your system more performant, because it has way less checks. We have to run through every single one of these conditions and check for them if we use continue to next step rather than end workflow path when the condition's not met. We could take this a step further, and I could even clean up my workflow steps and my my second set of steps, like the manual payment batches over 10K. I could remove the condition on my second and third step inside here where the workflow origin is 3, because those no longer need to be checked anymore when we use the end workflow path, because we'll never get to that point, because the first manual payments step won't be true. So it'll just end the workflow path, and it won't keep going on to these other steps, creating all this other congestion and extra performance and extra checks in the background. I know this is not the easiest topic to write down or just explain, and that's why I wanted to kind of show you in person, let you see it, feel it, and now you can go ahead and test it yourself. But the moral of the story is, in most cases here on our workflows, we want to use end workflow path on all of our steps, because we don't need to check the steps that come after it if the first one is not true. I hope you find this helpful. If you have any comments or feedback or questions, please let us know in the blog. Thanks.